Picture this. You take your seat in Nero's palace banquet where golden platters overflow with meat and wine and music drifts under ceilings painted with stars. The senators beside you laugh, nobles raise their cups, and for a heartbeat you believe this is Rome's glory on full display. Then the doors slam. Attendants drag men and women from the crowd, stripping away their dignity as they are pushed into the center of the hall. They are not guests. They are actors in a play they never chose. The emperor claps, the torches flare, and what unfolds is no feast but a theater of humiliation where Rome's elite are forced into roles of desire and shame before the eyes of their peers. Ancient chroniclers insisted these were not rumors but warnings. Suetonius wrote of banquets turned into obscene performances. Cassius Dio of nobles degraded in games staged as rituals. Nero called it entertainment. History remembers it as desecration. The emperor who claimed to be an artist revealed himself as something far darker, a man who weaponized intimacy itself to prove his power. This was the Rome of Nero, where pleasure became punishment and celebration dissolved into terror. When Emperor Claudius died in 54 CE, Rome turned its eyes to a boy scarcely old enough to rule himself. At just 16 years old, Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus became sole ruler of the Roman world. Statues rose, poets hailed him as the dawn of a golden age, and coins bore his youthful face. But standing in the shadows was the architect of his ascent, his mother, Agrippina the Younger. Agrippina was no ordinary Roman matron. She was a great-granddaughter of Augustus himself, niece of the notorious Emperor Caligula. Her lineage gave her unmatched prestige and her ambition gave her no boundaries. Ancient sources describe her as calculating, brilliant, and unrelenting in her pursuit of power. Her marriage to Claudius was not born of love, but of strategy. By wedding the aging emperor, she secured her son's future. Claudius already had a biological heir, Britannicus, but Agrippina worked tirelessly to sideline him. She convinced Claudius to adopt Nero. Within a few years, Britannicus faded into the background. Whispers later accused Agrippina of hastening Claudius's death with poison, serving him a dish of mushrooms, the food of the gods, that ended his reign and cleared the way for her teenage son. From the moment Nero took the throne, Agrippina's presence was impossible to ignore. She sat beside him during audiences with the Senate, accompanied him in ceremonial processions, and sometimes received foreign envoys herself. Coins from the early years even show their faces side by side, a stunning image in a culture that rarely allowed women to appear in political iconography. Rome saw not just a new emperor, but a ruling partnership, mother and son enthroned together. Yet the partnership carried a darker undertone. Ancient gossip claimed that Agrippina's hold over Nero went beyond politics. Suetonius and Dio both record rumors of incest, whispers that the emperor's mother shared her son's bed to bind him more tightly to her will. Whether true or slander, the persistence of such stories reveals how Romans viewed their relationship: unnatural, domineering, and corrupting. For a time, Rome tolerated it. The empire was stable, the frontiers secure, and the treasury filled. If the emperor spent his nights at feasts surrounded by musicians and actors, was that not the privilege of youth? But harmony could not last. The relationship between Nero and Agrippina was less a bond of love than a chain of iron. He began to seek companions who encouraged his excesses, young men who flattered his artistry, women who offered escape from his mother's shadow. In their company, he found freedom in music, theater, and revelry. To Nero, pleasure became defiance and desire became a weapon. If Agrippina embodied restraint, then indulgence was rebellion. Each night of drinking, each forbidden affair, each performance on stage was a declaration that he was his own master. Here lies the paradox. Without Agrippina, Nero might never have become emperor. Yet with her, he could never truly rule. The mother who had lifted him to the throne was the same mother who now stood in his way. By 59 CE, the gilded illusion of harmony had collapsed. Nero was 21 now, emboldened by sycophants and embittered by his mother's grasp. The breaking point came when Agrippina opposed his passions, particularly his growing attachment to Poppaea Sabina, a dazzlingly ambitious woman who would later replace Octavia as empress. Defiance from his own mother was intolerable. Nero's first solution was theatrical, almost absurd. He devised a plan worthy of the stage. Agrippina would be honored with a magnificent ship rigged to collapse at sea. The setting was Baiae, the luxurious resort town on the Bay of Naples. To the public eye, it was a son's gift of filial devotion. In reality, it was an execution disguised as spectacle. That night, Agrippina boarded the vessel. Then came the crash, the roof collapsing, the deck breaking apart. Screams echoed across the water. But fate intervened. Agrippina, though injured, survived. She swam through the black water and by sheer will reached the shore. For Nero, the failure was catastrophic. The attempt could no longer be hidden. To leave her alive was to live with a permanent enemy who knew the darkest secret of his reign. So the emperor turned from theater to brute force. Assassins were dispatched to her villa at Antium. Tacitus records her supposed last words. She bared her body, pointed to her womb and cried, "Strike here, for this bore Nero." The deed was done. Agrippina lay dead, and Nero stood as sole master of Rome. Yet even in triumph he revealed his corruption. Suetonius claims that when her corpse was presented, Nero remarked on her beauty, running his eyes over the body as though she were still an object to be possessed. The implications of matricide were immense. Rome had seen emperors poison brothers, exile wives, and execute rivals. But to kill one's mother was to shatter the very foundation of Roman morality. The principle of pietas, the sacred duty of respect owed to parents and gods, was central to Roman identity. By committing matricide, Nero placed himself outside the bounds of tradition. The Senate trembled. Among the people, the act was unforgivable. To them, Nero was no longer the golden youth of promise, but a tyrant who had drowned his last restraint in blood. And yet, for Nero, Agrippina's death was liberation. No longer checked by her authority, he surrendered fully to his desires. Tacitus notes a transformation after 59 CE. His indulgences grew bolder, his nights more excessive, his public appearances more theatrical. Agrippina's murder was more than a crime. It was a rebirth. In the blood of his mother, Nero shed the final chain of restraint. After Agrippina's blood was spilled, a new figure rose to dominate Nero's private world, Poppaea Sabina. Born into a noble family, she was famed for her beauty. Pale skin, golden hair, eyes said to glimmer with intelligence as much as allure. Poets compared her grace to Venus herself. But behind the serene image stood an ambitious heart. Poppaea urged Nero to cast aside his first wife, Octavia, who represented tradition and legitimacy. By 62 CE, Nero had divorced Octavia, accusing her of sterility. The public erupted in sympathy for the discarded empress. Threatened by her popularity, Nero answered with brutality. He accused her of adultery, fabricated evidence, and had her executed. Tacitus records that her maids were tortured until they confessed to false charges. With Octavia gone, Poppaea was elevated to empress. She basked in splendor, draped in pearls, perfumed with myrrh. To Nero, she was not merely wife, but muse, the embodiment of his desires. Yet their love was far from gentle. Ancient writers insist it was a union fueled by passion but scarred by violence. Suetonius claims Nero struck her in fits of jealousy only to shower her with gifts afterward. Their intimacy was a pendulum swinging between worship and abuse. The darkest moment arrived in 65 CE. Poppaea was pregnant, carrying what could have been the heir to the Julio-Claudian dynasty. But one evening, in a rage whose cause is lost to history, Nero lashed out. Tacitus writes that he kicked her violently in the abdomen. The blow killed both mother and unborn child. Other sources suggest she may have died from complications of pregnancy. The story of Nero's violence added later. Yet the version of the brutal kick persisted, for it fit the image of an emperor whose love could transform into lethal fury. Rome grieved. An empress slain by her husband's hand, whether in fact or in rumor, revealed the terrifying truth. In Nero's world, intimacy offered no protection. To be closest to the emperor was also to be most vulnerable. Nero's response to her death was as grotesque as it was revealing. He did not simply mourn. He sought to preserve her memory in ways that blurred the line between devotion and obsession. Some accounts claim he embalmed her body with perfumes fit for divinity, raising her to the status of a goddess. To lose Poppaea was to lose control of his fantasy. And Nero's fantasies could never die. The death of Poppaea left a void too large for ordinary grief. To Nero, she could not be gone. She had to be remade. In this desperate search, he found Sporus, a young boy described by ancient writers as strikingly beautiful with features so delicate they seemed almost feminine. To Nero's eyes, he resembled Poppaea enough to serve as a substitute. But a substitute was not enough. If Poppaea could not live, then Nero would force the living to become her. According to Cassius Dio, Nero ordered Sporus to be castrated. The boy's body was mutilated to erase its masculinity, reshaped into the emperor's vision of the woman he had lost. This was not merely abuse, it was the annihilation of identity. A boy was turned into a vessel for an emperor's obsession. But Nero did not stop there. He staged a wedding with attendants, dowry, and veil. The emperor married Sporus in a public ceremony. Suetonius records the scandal. Nero called Sporus Sabina, dressing him in the empress's clothes, parading him as though Poppaea had returned from the dead. It was grotesque theater, but also terrifyingly real. Rome watched as the emperor of the world turned grief into a parody of marriage, desire into domination. Together they appeared in public, husband and wife, emperor and queen. At games, festivals, and triumphs, Sporus stood by Nero's side, adorned with jewels and silks, the living echo of Poppaea. To traditional Romans, it was unbearable. Marriage was sacred, for lineage, the foundation of family. For Nero to wed a castrated boy was not just scandal. It was a mockery of Rome itself. And yet, no one could stop him. Senators whispered in disgust. The people muttered in fear. But the emperor's will was law. Sporus became both empress and prisoner, adored and humiliated, elevated to grandeur and stripped of humanity. He was the embodiment of Nero's darkest truth, that power, unchecked, could bend not just politics, but the flesh itself. What did Sporus feel? The historians are silent. No words survive in his own voice. Perhaps he endured in terror, or perhaps numbness became his only refuge. History remembers the tyrant's desires, not the victim's pain. Even in Nero's final days, Sporus remained by his side. When rebellion spread through the empire and the Senate declared Nero a public enemy, the emperor fled Rome with only a few companions. Among them was Sporus, still bound to him by chains of obsession. Sporus survived Nero, but only to meet further tragedy. After Nero's death, Sporus fell into the hands of other powerful men. Otho, briefly emperor, took him as a consort. Later, Vitellius humiliated him further, threatening to use him in a public performance. Faced with this degradation, Sporus took his own life. Even in freedom from Nero, he could not escape the shadow of being remade. Power behind doors was never enough for Nero. He needed witnesses. He needed applause. He needed Rome itself to confirm that his desires were law. In the years after 59 CE, the emperor turned the city into a stage where politics, performance, and the body fused into one long spectacle. Ancient writers agree on one thing: Nero loved performance more than government. He sang. He acted. He raced chariots. He founded festivals after Greek fashion and distributed crowns as if Olympus had relocated to the Palatine. Senators accustomed to deciding fates in marble halls now sat trapped in wooden theaters, forced to cheer their sovereign's every note. Suetonius claims doors were barred while Nero performed. Some in the audience fainted with heat, others died quietly, and their bodies were passed along overhead so as not to disturb the show. Whether literal or exaggerated, the story captures a truth. Under Nero, spectatorship was obedience. To watch was to submit. The spectacles did not end with song. They extended to the emperor's private banquets, where the line between entertainment and punishment dissolved. Guests came dressed for feasting and found themselves cast in roles. Women of high birth were paraded as nymphs. Men who prided themselves on dignity were costumed as satyrs. Gardens were illuminated by thousands of lamps. Amid this glow, couples were paired and ordered to perform scenes that mocked Rome's ideals of pudicitia, the modesty that had once defined elite virtue. In this theater, modesty itself became the joke. Rumor had it that Nero sometimes donned animal skins, was chained as if newly loosed from a cage, and fell upon bound men and women as a beast in heat. The image is brutal, perhaps propaganda, but it endures because it explains how contemporaries understood him. An emperor who crossed the line between ruler and creature. Beyond the palace, Nero staged his desires in arenas open to the public. He appeared as a musician in the theater, a charioteer at the circus, a judge at games he himself had invented. He ordered elite Romans to compete on stage and in the ring, roles that tradition reserved for professionals, slaves, and the desperate. What for Nero was liberation, for Rome was disgrace. Aristocrats taught from boyhood to guard their honor now begged for imperial favor in costumes and masks. Sex was present everywhere, not always explicit, but always implied as threat, reward, or weapon. Lovers were assigned, withdrawn, reassigned. Marriages could be forced or dissolved on a whim. A rival could be publicly shamed by the discovery of an affair. The mechanics of empire, offices, stipends, commands, found their mirror in a sexual economy controlled by the emperor's mood. Those who complied rose. Those who hesitated discovered how easily consent could be interpreted. After the Great Fire of 64 CE, Nero erected the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a palace complex so vast it seemed to swallow parts of the city. There were dining rooms with ceilings that rotated and sprinkled perfumes, halls frescoed with pastoral fantasies, and artificial lakes reflecting orchestras at night. If Rome had once prided itself on gravitas, the sober weight of public duty, the Golden House announced a different era, sensation as sovereignty. The more Nero performed, the more he required not just applause, but complicity. A senator who clapped too softly could be marked. A matron who hesitated when summoned might find herself accused of treason through invented lovers and convenient confessions. Under such conditions, shame ceased to be a personal feeling and became a public tool. Rome's ruling class, trained to fear dishonor above anything, discovered that dishonor itself had become imperial policy. Nero turned sexuality into governance. He made spectatorship the measure of loyalty, exposure the price of favor, humiliation the currency of the court. The result was a city both entertained and terrified, outwardly festive, inwardly bruised. By the late 60s, the empire strained under debts, conspiracies, and provincial revolts. Yet, in the capital, performances continued. The emperor's voice filled theaters. His image floated across festivals. The last act came quickly. Rebellions gathered, legions chose other masters, and senators who once clapped in rhythm began to count the risks of staying. The audience changed its mind. And once the audience changes, no play can continue. In 68 CE, Nero fled his city, deserted by guards and condemned by the Senate, whispering of artistry even as he faced disgrace. His final words, remembered by Suetonius, were not of empire or duty, but of performance. What an artist dies in me. He believed himself an actor leaving the stage. But history remembered him as something else entirely. Picture again the banquet hall. The torches still burn, but the music has long since died. Empty tables stand like monuments, their gold dulled, their silk stained, the air heavy with echoes that once mingled laughter with cries no one dared acknowledge. You walk across the marble floor and feel the silence that followed. A silence more damning than applause, for it carries the weight of everything Rome tried to forget. Nero is gone. What endured was not his music nor his games, but the shadow he left behind. Chroniclers preserved the scandals, the betrayals, the spectacles where power mocked restraint. His reign became a warning etched into memory, that when command knows no limit, humanity itself can be turned into theater and dignity into an audience's passing amusement. The banquet you entered at the start was never a celebration. It was a mirror of what happens when desire becomes decree, when grief becomes obsession, when cruelty wears the mask of art. Nero is gone, but the question remains. How many rulers since have worn his mask, hiding tyranny beneath the glow of power? If you want more stories like this, subscribe and share your thoughts below. History's darkest chapters teach us the most about power, and there are many more stories waiting to be told.